Five Nights at Freddy's has more tie-in media and merch than you can shake an L-Chips chip bag at. From games, to books, to toys, to popcorn buckets, to movies, and yes, even the humble graphic novel. And if there's two things I love, it's Five Nights at Freddy's and comic books. Sure, we'll go with that for you today. The Five Nights at Freddy's comics play an interesting role in a community that is so focused on lore and mystery solving. Fans are often interested in these stories as vessels for answers, instead of whole pieces of media in their own right. As such, when discussing the FNaF books, the fandom only really wants to discuss how they affect the game lore, and that goes doubles for the comics, as they are even less important because everything that could be gleaned from them was already analyzed when the books came out. But I am not here to theorize. I'm here to chew gum and analyze the comic medium, and I'm all out of bubble gum. And if you're like me, when you get really into something, you just read or watch or play it over and over, often for months on end, and need to know every little detail of production and the themes it play in. And no, I haven't been diagnosed with anything. So stick around for FNaF comic reviews, information on the comic creators, comic recommendations for FNaF fans, and also to hear about that one time Archie was suspiciously killed by animal animatronics in an arcade. Awesome. It's time to get between the panels of everyone's favorite pizzeria, and there are quite a lot of panels. Maybe I didn't realize quite how many of these things had come out before I started down this path of skeletons and sea bonnies. God, sea bonnies. So where do they come up with the ideas for these comics anyway? Well, actually, all of the FNaF graphic novels so far have been based on the Five Nights at Freddy's books. There are no original graphic novel stories. And as far as the quality of these adaptations, I must confess it's a mixed bag. I don't know about the books themselves. I don't have the patience to read all of those. When would I read my comic books? So I can't speak to how well it's being adapted, only the final product itself. But no comic exists in a vacuum, unless an astronaut is reading it. So let's dive into publishing. Scholastic publishes the graphic novels under their graphics imprint, which was founded in 2005 and specializes in graphic novels for teens and kids. Scholastic publishes all of the FNaF books and has since they agreed to make the paperback/re-release for the original Silver Eyes novel and signed Scott Cawthon for a 3-book deal. The rest is Faz history. Something to keep in mind for these books that I think is useful is that there are 2 groupings of FNaF comics, the Silver Eyes trilogy and Fazbear Frights and beyond. Let's take things back in time to a much different FNaF franchise with the Silver Eyes trilogy. I've had these comics pretty much since they came out, which was apparently 7 years ago, and the more time passes since they came out, the weirder the Silver Eyes books are, an oddity in the history of the franchise. The main character of these books is now McKenna Grace, the puppet with hair. Also, I've definitely read more comics in the past year than I had in my entire life at that point, so perspective has changed drastically since my first reading. To delve into the creative side, let's start with the writing team. All 3 books in the original trilogy were written by Scott Cawthon and Kira Breed-Risley. Scott Cawthon is the boss in FNaF world, the phone guy, has some lawsuits pending, and is the guy who started a franchise that took the world by storm. Meanwhile, Kira Breed-Risley is the co-author with plenty of non-FNaF work that helped set her up for this job, including plays and books. The first book gives an adapted by credit to Claudia Schroeder, who we'll get to later with the artists. And the latter 2 books in the trilogy have an adapted by credit for Christopher Hastings, probably because people don't realize how different comic writing is from novel writing. And he has the comic book know-how with books under his belt like Gwenpool and Longshot Saves the Marvel Universe. Just a small change like getting rid of the unnecessary chapter labels that break up the first book in a very unnatural way does a lot. He understands the medium he's working with. The first volume, Silver Eyes, has art by Claudia Schroeder, who is certainly an interesting character when it comes to uncovering the history of this franchise. You know, I'm not here to be a hater, but when you don't have anything nice to say, you really shouldn't say anything at all. I just don't think this book meets the standards for a publisher as big as Scholastic, and I think an editor should have stepped in for quality control. Claudia Aguirre, for the sequel Twisted Ones, is 10,000 leagues above the first one. The digitalness of the first one is not completely gone, but it doesn't bother me as much here. I've also read a non-FNaF comic by this artist that I liked even more. I love watching the evolution of an artist's work, and this is a beautiful book. Aguirre is also a GLAAD Award nominee, which is for queer comic creators, and an Eisner Award nominee, which is not exclusively for cool people comic creators. Fourth Closet, meanwhile, is illustrated by Diana Camero, whose style is a really smooth transition from Aguirre's in a much more natural way than the first to the second book was. I think this book looks just as good as the last one did, which is fortunate because as we get to the next section of this video, Camero is going to become a reoccurring character. She's also done stories for the Archie comics, Camp Pickens, and Fear the Funhouse, and I did go and immediately read those books after finding this out because I love Archie. Also, why was Baby so weirdly hot in the fourth? As for colorists, Laurie Smith has credits on The Silver Eyes and Twisted Ones, and Eva de la Cruz has credits on Twisted Ones and The Fourth Closet, which is a fitting gradient for a series that loves its gradients. So many gradients. The amount of backgrounds that are just gradients in this series and the other ones is staggering. I also can only make the assumption that Eva de la Cruz did more on the Twisted One, because comparing the style, we see more of the soft eraser edge to the shading for Twisted Ones as opposed to Laurie Smith's hard cell shading. Now to quick fire the letters. Silver Eyes is Schroeder as just part of the art, I assume, because no one else is listed in the credits. Twisted Ones and Fourth Closet are by Mike Fiorentino, and like they say about most of the good letters, when they're good, you don't have to think about them, and he does a really good, even job in these books. Now that we've set the scene, let's discuss the events that take place in these stories. You know how some people complain about movie adaptations of books because they never have enough time to explain everything like a book can? Well, a graphic novel is even tighter than a movie, and it doesn't take much to realize that this plot is as condensed as a kid trapped under a ticket booth. Not that I know what I'm missing out on for the FNaF novels, I didn't read them as they came out, and who has time to read a book without pictures anymore? Certainly not me. But when you've got a plot about robot people and souls and serial killers and a host of side characters that do almost nothing, and dead twins that are actually you, that are actually alive but estranged, it can be a lot to unpack. I'm not going to beat around the Faz bush any longer. The story's quality leaves quite a bit to be desired. Robots that look exactly like humans, so much so that they think they're humans and bleed, doesn't jar me as much as it does most people, and the robot without a soul being kinder than the robot with one is actually quite poignant in my opinion. But the overall plot has so many unanswered or tangential aspects to it, and the fact that the main FNaF plot and characters are so tangential by the time the books are actually good, it makes it very odd to sit through. We follow Charlotte Emily, Charlie, as she returns to her hometown 10 years after some kids went missing / were murdered. She reunites with her childhood friends and investigates the pizzeria the kids went missing from, which her dad also owned, and finds out the co-owner was doing the killing. Also, the animatronics are haunted and slightly murderous. The murderer is killed by the main character, mostly, inside his springlock suit and dragged away by the haunted animatronics. A year later, Charlie comes back home as a bunch of bodies with springlock suit markings are found, and it turns out to be the work of some zombie animatronics, which is to say they burst from the ground at night, and they've been killing people, and eventually snatch Charlie as well. But it turns out she's fine, actually. But it's not fine, and that's not Charlie at all. Charlie's will they won't they John is highly suspicious and finds out that yeah, that's definitely not Charlie. Turns out Charlie is a robot, and that was her future body that's possessed by a spirit, and also Afton is still alive, and not Charlie is working with him. Then the real Charlie kamikazes, or does she? And then the book ends. Now, I'm not explaining it as thoroughly as perhaps I could be, but you get the idea. This book series is all over the place. Fourth Closet is the best in my opinion, because the story has finally decided what it wants to be about, at only the expense of the main character becoming a side character as she spends most of it passed out. Win some, lose some. It's also odd because while the first one is a FNaF story, as the series goes on, it becomes about Charlie's arc, and she's not in the games, so it's very odd. Odd is the word of the day here, actually. I would not recommend this book to people who are not hardcore FNaF. Even then, it doesn't really matter to the modern lore. I would say at all. So if you're someone who is a fandom completionist, go ahead. But I don't think it's super advisable. I've got nostalgia for them, sure, but that doesn't mean I can't see that. But the franchise must pump forward. One series ending, meaning another, better one, could take its place. We cut to Fazbear Frights, based on the Fazbear Frights books, and its sequel series, Tales from the Pizzaplex, based on the Iliad. Nah, just joking. And I think even on a conceptual level, this is a much better setup for success than the Silver Eyes trilogy. The stories it's based off are much shorter than the full novels for the original comics, and that helps tremendously, even with the shorter anthology comics present. The artists and co-writers also change with every story, and I think that's admirable for a series based on an anthology, because the Fazbear theming never fails to give the stories cohesion in my eyes. Although I kind of wish they stretched this idea even further by having artists with more different styles. Most of the art in this is what I would scientifically describe as the same level of cartoony. It's also fun to see which artists return between volumes and recognize them as the books progress. I think the Fazbear Frights books serve as nice, passable kids' horror books. If it wasn't FNaF, would I give about it? Probably not even a little. But they definitely had better stories than the trilogy, even if Aguirre is the best artist these books ever had, in my opinion. Peaked too soon. Let's go through the frights one by one to see which creator names stick around and come to define the series. Graphic Novel Collection 1 is written by Cawthon and Ellie Cooper and Carly Ann West, and assume everything will be adapted by Christopher Hastings from this point on. He's really helping to hold these stories together, and Cawthon is always going to be there as well. And the letters for this are by Micah Myers. Into the Pit is drawn by Didi Esmeralda and colors by Eva de la Cruz. Told you she'd return. Esmeralda is one of the most reoccurring artists in these. The plot is about a time-traveling ball pit and identity theft of the Springtrap variety. It even got its own game. To Be Beautiful is drawn by Anthony Morris Jr. with colors by Ben Sawyer. It's about a baby-like animatronic replacing parts of a self-conscious teenage girl until she's ship of Theseus into a pile of robot guts. Out of Stock is drawn by Andy Santagata with colors by Gonzalo Duarte. A group of kids snatch a defective toy that turns out to be extremely dangerous but allergic to light. So, easy solution at least. Graphic Novel Collection 2 is written by Andrea Wagner and Carly Ann West, with letters by Micah Myers. Fetch is drawn by Didi Esmeralda, with colors by Eva de la Cruz, about a robot dog that retrieves anything you ask for, like fingers and corpses. Room for One More is actually one of my favorites, and I think makes the transition to a comic really well with the dream sequences, getting to take an even funner focus, with art by Anthony Morris Jr. and colors by Ben Sawyer, where a bunch of tiny ballerina dolls climb into a security guard and come home with him after a shift. The New Kid with art by Corn McPherson and colors by Gonzalo Duarte, where a new kid in town falls victim to a deadly prank due to another kid's insecurity. However, all is not what it seems, with supernatural forces likely afoot. Graphic Novel Collection 3 is written by Kelly Pera and Andrea Wagner, letters by Taylor Esposito, which will be true for everything moving forward. Step Closer, with art by Didi Esmeralda and colors by Ben Sawyer, is about a real rude brother, a reoccurring motif in these stories, and he's trying to scare his younger brother and winds up with a Foxy-sponsored curse. Bunny Call, with art by Corn McPherson and colors by Gonzalo Duarte, is my favorite story out of all of these. The character arc and use of FNaF concepts really strikes me as the perfect balance. A downbeat dad decides to sign up for a prank on his kids, only to regret it when he realizes he has been too hard on them, and regrets it even more when the prank has been replaced by a potentially killer mascot. I just love that he learns to love life right before he has to fight to maintain it. Hide and Seek, drawn by Diana Camaro, she's back, baby, and colors by Judy Lay, about a younger brother trying to prove himself against his older brother's high score until a Bonnie he was seeking becomes a shadow attached to his back. Yeah, it doesn't make sense when you read it either. Anyways, moving on to Graphic Novel Collection 4, written by Ellie Cooper and Andrea Wagner. The Breaking Wheel, with art by Diana Camaro and colors by Judy Lay, is about a kid who locks a bully in an exoskeleton the bully built as payback for his friend. But a separate remote in possession of a child has also been unknowingly controlling the exoskeleton to horrifying results for the bully. Sergio's Lucky Day, with art by Corn McPherson and colors by Gonzalo Duarte, is about this guy finding a balloon boy toy that Sergio takes the advice of, and it ends up winning him the lottery and eventually losing his face. It's a weird one. The Cliffs is illustrated by Ben Sawyer, with colors by Eva de la Cruz, also gets my fast stamp of approval as one of my favorites. A single father gets his toddler a Freddy toy that comes with a watch that sends him updates about the child it's watching. When the child goes missing, the only update the watch sends him is The Cliffs, like he's encouraging him to end it all, but there may be another answer afoot. I just love the dad's fight against nihilism as he forces himself to keep trying despite apparently losing everything. The final Fazbear Fright graphic novel collection is Graphic Novel Collection number 5, written by Ellie Cooper and Andrea Wagner. Jump for Tickets, illustrated by Diana Camaro and colors by Judy Lay, is about a kid who just can't win those ticket shower games, so he rigs it so that the big kids will get more tickets, but he ends up actually getting trapped and squished due to the intervention of a clown animatronic. Guess he was jokerized. Sea Bonnies, with art by Corn McPherson and colors by Gonzalo Duarte. And what? I'm gonna go delirious after writing so many recaps. But this story, honestly, you can go read that darn thing yourself if you want to, but I want to know how many kids reading this knew what sea monkeys were, and also why the sea bonnies are so big in comparison to a sea monkey. This tank is definitely not big enough for all of the sea bonnies. I want answers, people. Find Player 2, with art by Ben Sawyer and colors by Eva de la Cruz, focuses on two girls playing hide and seek, where one is never found. Years later, the adult survivor goes after the man who she thinks is responsible, but actually I guess the middle part of this book is just a goose chase, because she eventually goes back to Freddy's and finds out her friend died hiding in a hide and seek game, which she is then locked in. Really a story that makes you go, so what was the point of all that? An unlikely series of events to me. And to wrap up our anthologies, the first volume of Five Nights at Freddy's Tales from the Pizzaplex graphic novel collection Volume 1 by Andrea Wagner. Under construction, illustrated by Mackie Pamantuan, colors by Benjamin Sawyer. Wait, why did he get credited with his full name this time? Clearly not as close as he used to be with the credits page. Is about a girl whose friends get her to sneak into a closed-off Freddy's attraction that uses AR to show her her dream birthday, with everyone celebrating her. But when she leaves the machine, her life only goes downhill, including the zombie apocalypse of cancer-like creatures. But did she ever really leave the machine at all? Haps is illustrated by Corn McPherson and colors by Gonzalo Duarte, and is about some kids that spend a day exploring Freddy's tubes until the Roomba, Haps, takes revenge on them for beating him up. You know, fair enough. Cleithrophobia is illustrated by Diana Camaro with colors by Judy Lay, about a technician who gets stuck in Belora's tubes and ripped in half by her. The tubes at the Pizzaplex do not mess around. That was a lot of stories. A mess of robots and mascots and arcades and ball pits, and I've compiled a chart to show how many times everyone on this list was involved in a story. We can really see whose styles stick around to shape the books. It's a real treat. There's a lot more enjoyment I think can be gained from these books than the original trilogy, because they have a better vision. It's not about solving the ultimate mystery of the games, but instead just engaging with the world building of the Fazbear universe, and anything and everything that's even tangentially related to that. It's also very interesting that while the main games also delve into themes of consumerism and capitalism because of the in-universe popularity of Fazbear as a brand, but the books deal a lot more with poverty and broken homes. I guess completely well-adjusted kids have less of a reason to act out and run off to Fazbear locations. The vast majority of the protagonists fall into one of two categories: troubled kid and depressed adult man. In case it's not clear, I love Five Nights at Freddy's. I love the mascots. I love the mystery. I love the consumerist aesthetic and universe. FNaF is just fun. It's also one of the franchises to define the Gen Z experience. I think the comics hold such an interesting perspective. They aren't mysteries, they aren't so connected to the rest of the franchise, but they really do a great job at exploring how many different ways Fazbear's affects the entirety of its world in so many different ways. Does something being interesting make it good? Well, it's like enjoyable, but I think there are better options out there for a lot of the things you may be seeking in the comics. The stories are going to be more expanded upon in their original format. That's not the place to go if you want that hit of mascot horror lore you've been looking for. Nothing here is new, but if it inspires you to look for something you love about FNaF in the comic book medium, I have some suggestions. Maybe you're interested in mascot horror drama or an anthropomorphic killer. I've got the books for you. So let's find out what's behind door number 1 together, shall we? Let's start things off with Dark Ride. You know it, you love it, it's mascot horror. Also some family drama that gives the audience a mystery to keep them engaged in. But have you ever had it in a story that exists exclusively in comic form? I didn't know anything about this comic before I picked it up after judging a book by not even its cover, but like its spine, because I like learning about roller coasters. Not riding them, though. Those things are scary. Anyways, Dark Ride is the most mascot horror comic I've ever read. It's also such a treat when I try a comic I know nothing about, and it turns out to be great. Basically, this guy owns a spooky amusement park that is also known for some strange happenings and rumors, and of course, its mascot devil. Somebody's got to break the news to Bendy, but it's not going to be me. You want to know what's also been part of FNaF since the very first game? Serial killing and anthropomorphic characters out for blood. And while Samantha isn't an animatronic, I'm pretty sure she would make that Freddy guy his pants. Let's talk about one of the most unique comics I've ever read, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. This story takes place in a small town full of animal people, going about their small town lives in peace of mind. Of course, they don't realize that their local hardware store owner and Brown Bear is actually a serial killer who goes to the big city in search of victims as to not arouse suspicion back home. This book is awesome. I will warn you though, if you like FNaF because of its subtlety and horror for all ages approach, this is not the book for you. People get drugged and their fingers get cut off, not for the kiddos. However, if you want a little whimsy in your horror, you cannot go wrong with this book. And finally, two things that set the tone for Five Nights at Freddy's and something that would come to define the mascot horror genre, taking something for kids and making it scary and hosting a Pizzaplex's worth of lore. One of my favorite comics I've read in 2026 so far, and one of my favorite horror comics of all time is Ice Cream Man. And let me tell you, scooping hasn't been this scary since Elizabeth became baby. Ice Cream Man is an anthology, which you may also appreciate if you're a fan of the Fazbear Frights books or comics. It is no joke my favorite anthology story ever, because its consistency and diversity in storytelling is so impressive. I would describe the world building as almost Lovecraftian, not because of the unknowable monsters or murder cults, not that it doesn't have those, but because the way the character of Ice Cream Man and his cousin/rivals, powers, work almost as gods. The best issues to check out, anthology, so you don't have to read the others if you don't want to, since you're FNAFers like me, would probably be issue 1, where a terribly mean child and his pet spider get their comeuppance, and issue 7, My Little Poltergeist, where a kid has to overcome her grief about her best friend's death and also try not to get eaten. My favorite story is The Border Story, which isn't even a horror story, but tell me a book that ends like this isn't an absolute banger. And to finish off the recommendation portion of this video, it's not a whole series, it's not even a whole issue, but it is this one Archie book, and it's so clearly FNAF inspired, I thought it was really fun. But that's the kind of nerd knowledge you get with a diverse nerd portfolio. It is my pleasure to introduce to you part 2 of Archie Horror Presents Chilling Adventures. For the story Living on Part-Time, Archie has taken a job as, stop me if you've heard this one, a security guard for an arcade, and finds himself attacked by the mascot. It's only 6 pages, but literally, how can you not love this? Well, maybe you don't love Archie getting murdered, but like, besides that, it's a wonderful homage. So, there you have it. Five Nights at Freddy's comics, and the comics I would rather read instead of them. Horror comics come in many shapes and sizes, and while some say the scariest thing is the unknown, that makes for bad media recommendation. So, get out there and find some new stories to love. You can always come back to FNAF on your next shift, but for now, it's... Thank you for watching. If you like spooky things, check out our latest video on a little-known horror web series and trying to dissect its story. And Scholastic, if you're looking for any new FNAF comic artists, my twin is available.